Hi everybody, it's Andrea. I am recording this on the evening of Monday, March 30th, so you'll be watching it on March 31st. I've got a lot to talk about. I'm still struggling with the technical side of it. I have discovered that I'm neither a good producer nor a good engineer, but I never give up. There are going to be a few more maybe choppy things in this as I try new experiments, and you're just going to have to bear with me. First thing is I have an image for those of you who are not watching, which shows a caricature of Trump with his Joint Chiefs of Staff in front. They're all sitting there in front of a map of Iran, and he's saying, what are our options? And the caption is, what did he know and when did he know it? I really enjoy creating images with ChatGPT. It lets me bring my inner creative self out because I have absolutely no natural creativity. The question then is, how smart is Trump? What does he actually know? Does he have a plan? And what you'll see in this discussion and some of the other things I want to talk about is that one of the defining tropes of this war is that Trump is an idiot who has no idea what he's doing, stumbled into it, had no plans whatsoever. The meek generals just went along with it, and there's absolutely, he's an idiot. I'll start with a couple of videos. The first video is from Margaret Brennan on Meet the Nation or whatever the show is, talking to General Frank McKenzie, who is a retired Marine Corps general, and he worked in CENTCOM. He's about to take over as head of the Citadel, the military school in Charleston. So that'll be kind of cool. I'm going to hustle and see if I can meet him somehow. So here is General Frank McKenzie.
The president has made clear that he needs to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. His language has been contradictory on some of these points as to who's going to do it and when. What's the military reality of making it passable?
We're on our way to doing that now, Margaret. This is part of a plan that's been in existence for many years. What we're doing right now is we're reducing Iranian ability to target ships in the Strait through their short-range missiles, their drones, and other activities. We do that by maintaining air superiority over southern Iran on a 24/7 basis, looking for where these missiles are and striking them relentlessly. Once we reduce those to a very low level, then you'll be able to go in, if necessary, sweep for mines. I'm not certain they put mines in the water yet. I predict eventually they will. It's their nature. But we have the ability to do this. We're on plan. I'll be honest with you, Margaret. I've simulated this many years in many positions at Central Command. We're a little further along than we would have expected to be at this point in all the simulations that I've seen.
I'm going to guess in your simulations you looked at what would happen to the Strait of Hormuz, even though the president said no one ever thought of it. You thought of it, didn't you?
The U.S. military thinks of a lot of things. We certainly have thought of the Strait of Hormuz, thought of Karg Island, think of all those islands on the southern littoral of Iran.
What he's saying is that there was a plan. Yes, there definitely was a plan. He was very careful not to comment about Trump specifically, but he said, first of all, as I have believed, that this war is going splendidly and is way ahead of anything anybody had predicted. And second of all, he said that there was always a plan for Karg Island, for the Strait of Hormuz. The military was not blindsided by what Iran did. The second video I want to show you is Trump back in 1987 talking about what he would do in Iran. So this is not a sudden brainstorm he had, nor was he pushed into this by Israel. This is from 1987.
Because I'm running for the presidency. I'm here because I'm personally tired of seeing this great country of ours being ripped off.
But as far as Trump is concerned, our allies are only part of the problem. The real culprit is Iran.
Why couldn't we go in and take over some of their oil, which is along the sea?
How would you do that? Would you send in the Marines? Would you take a chance in a war?
Let them have Iran. You take their oil. That's what
How?
How?
I mean, do we want a war? What do you mean we
go in,
take their oil?
You go in. You're
How
gonna have
do
a
we
war,
go
Barbara.
in?
You're going to have a war by being weak.
Okay, how do we go in? What do we do?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You're going to have a war, and it's going to start in the Middle East.
What if the Soviet Union said, you do this to Iran, we're going to come in?
I don't believe they'd do it. The next time Iran attacks this country, go in and grab one of their big oil installations, and I mean grab it and keep it, and get back your losses, because this country has lost plenty because of Iran.
I don't think I need to expand on that. The third video I want to talk to you about starts shading into what the media are doing. Last time I did a video, I talked about the fifth column and how our media is a fifth column because they are working for Iran. They are doing anything they can to undermine the war. And this is where we get to the Trump idiot and Trump no plan scheme. And that is their driving narrative. It's a quagmire, even though it's been an extraordinarily successful war in military terms because Trump is an idiot who has no plan. I'll start with Rubio talking about the plan which Trump articulated on the first day and that Trump and Rubio have articulated consistently since then. It's an important point to recall because Trump is trying to negotiate a settled peace, but he wants to achieve his plan. I think he also wants to show that he did try to negotiate when he takes over Karg Island and completely destroys the Iran and forces them into a total post-Hiroshima kind of surrender. Here is the video of Marco Rubio being beautifully snarky to the media and saying what his plan is.
Operation, okay, and that's what this is. It's about very specific objectives. The president laid them out on the first night of the operation. I'll repeat them to you now because I hear a lot of talk about we don't know what the clear objectives are. Here they are. You should write them down. Number one, the destruction of their Air Force. Number two, the destruction of their Navy. Number three, the severe diminishing of their missile launching capability. And number four, the destruction of their factories so they can't make more missiles and more drones to threaten us in the future. All of this so that they can never hide behind it to acquire a nuclear weapon. That was our objective from the beginning. That remains our objective now. We are on pace and, in fact, ahead of schedule on some of those things, and we are going to achieve those things in a number of weeks, not in a number of months.
There's a plan. It's a very clear plan. I want to get back to the point about the media dishonesty. Before you forget the General Frank McKenzie video, you may recall that what she said to him is, Trump said he never thought of the Strait of Hormuz. And my first thought when I heard that was, that sounds like one of two things. Either Trump being cagey about what his plans are because he keeps getting asked about his plans, and he would be an idiot, as he said, to tell the media his plans, military plans. The other thing I thought is that Trump is being snarky with the media. He often is. The media have no sense of humor. They always assume when he's sarcastic that he's speaking literally. And maybe he did say, duh, of course I had no plan for the Strait of Hormuz, meaning he did. But I went to ChatGPT. I thought I'd better trace down what she said and the context. And what ChatGPT said is, there is no credible evidence that, here, let me show you all this. Wait, no, I'm out of order again. I keep doing this. There is no credible evidence that Donald Trump said he never thought of the Strait of Hormuz. What he has actually said about the Strait of Hormuz, writes ChatGPT. Recent verified reporting shows Trump has been talking about the Strait of Hormuz frequently, not ignoring it. He said the U.S. doesn't really need it as much as others, meaning that the U.S. is not dependent on oil coming through the strait because under Trump especially, the U.S. smartly has become energy independent. He claimed the U.S. doesn't need help reopening or securing it, which is true, although he's made the point that those nations that actually need oil from the strait might be interested in helping the U.S., because if they don't help the U.S., it's not a U.S. priority. He has discussed military options and pressure on other countries to deal with it. He has warned Iran and tied the strait to broader military strategy. In other words, he has clearly been thinking about and discussing it a lot. Well, of course he has. He's no idiot, and that gets me to the slide I inadvertently showed you before. It is from an essay at PJ Media by Matt Margolis, and it's entitled, RFK Nuked One of the Left's Favorite Myths About Trump. I'm going to quote from it because it's worth it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. showed up at CPAC and said something that's going to make a lot of Democrats uncomfortable. The man who spent years on the opposite side of the political aisle from Donald Trump, and technically ran against him, sort of, stood up and essentially torched the left's favorite talking point, that Trump is stupid. And I'm going to quote what RFK said. He has encyclopedic molecular knowledge on these wide range of very, very eclectic interests: music, Broadway shows, pro wrestling, football, every sport, golf, Kennedy said. He knows how everybody made their money and what deals they made, and he tells stories all the time about it. It's just one after the other. I'm going to interject here. One could say at this point that all Kennedy has done is shown that Trump knows pop culture really well. Not that smart. It's a little more complex than that. Here's what he also said, and I'm again quoting what Margolis wrote. He got a placemat. Kennedy described sitting across the table from Trump when the conversation turned to Syria. What happened next was, by any measure, remarkable. He got a placemat and he turned it on its back, and then he took a Sharpie and he drew a perfect map of the Mideast. And then he put the troop strength of every country on every border on that map, Kennedy recounted. Off of the top of his head, writes Margolis, mid-meal, Trump sketched a geopolitically accurate map of one of the most complex regions on Earth and annotated it with military data. That's the guy the media has spent a decade calling an idiot. I can't add to that. But what I do want to add to that is something a little different. It was a story at Red State that sparked my interest. If you're looking at the video, what you see on the screen is a picture of Ronald Reagan on the campus of UC Berkeley. A young Reagan, it's as if he's governor. ChatGPT, I simply said, do a picture of Ronald Reagan on the campus of UC Berkeley. And it came up with him in his young governor era. And it had people behind him saying, down with Reagan, and showing peace signs. And I thought, that's very clever of ChatGPT, because that's the point I wanted to make. I'm going to a story that Ward Clark put up, as I said, on Red State. The headline struck me: "The day America held its breath. Where were you when John Hinckley tried to assassinate President Reagan?" Well, I can tell you exactly where I was. I was on the campus of UC Berkeley. I grew up, as most readers know, in a Democrat household. I grew up in San Francisco, and I attended UC Berkeley, which I hated with a mad passion. I was desperately unhappy at Berkeley. I was commuting, so I was very lonely. It's hard to make friends when you're driving, when you're working 15, 20 hours a week and commuting another 15, 20 hours a week. You're not part of campus life. I was also bored and unhappy in classes. I was a liberal arts major, and I knew that my professors were kind of idiotic. I just didn't understand why they were kind of idiotic. Only later did I realize that everything was going through a Marxist filter. Even though they never, ever talked politics in the class, to give them credit, their worldview was essentially Marxist. And you can't put Marxism on medieval England, no matter how you try. But they did. So I was on campus when news broke that Reagan had been shot. I believe we knew he was alive. It was just news that he'd been shot. And what happened on the campus of UC Berkeley, this would have been in 1981, I think, was when he was shot. Wild celebrations. Everybody was thrilled that he'd been shot and hoped that he was dead. And I believe that when we learned he was alive, there was disappointment. As I said, I was commuting and I went home to my parents, who were Democrats. And I said, Reagan was shot. Isn't that great? My parents read me the riot act. This is how Democrats, the young Democrats, were already shaping up. And my father's generation of Democrats was very different. They said it was absolutely outrageous to celebrate an assassination attempt on a duly elected American president. They explained to me that this was a profoundly undemocratic act, that it was evil, that it drove the breakdowns of society and countries. That was a long time ago, but I have to tell you, that was a time that was a defining moment, even though it took years to germinate in my brain. It was a defining moment in understanding, although it took years to germinate, who the Democrats are and what a constitution is and what a true representative democracy was. So I remember that day very, very vividly. Switching subjects now, I want to go to the execrable Mayor Mamdani, and it's about Mamdani and Passover. Although it's really less about him and more about the leftist approach to Passover. If you're looking at the video, what you see is I asked ChatGPT to create a picture of Moses confronting Pharaoh, except I said, make it edgy with Antifa and drag queens. So the image shows a Moses clad in a keffiyeh, wearing an Antifa action shirt, holding his staff under an Antifa flag, and he's pointing at Pharaoh, who's sitting there on his pharaonic throne with his legs crossed, and eye makeup and lipstick, and behind him are 3 drag queens. Once again, I just gave it the hint, and I would say that ChatGPT really, really nailed it. Now, as you know, Mamdani has been scolded for being anti-Semitic because he constantly attacks Israel, and he used St. Patrick's Day to talk about the genocide in Gaza. There was no genocide in Gaza. And because his wife turns out to be quite genocidal, who celebrated the October 7th genocide attack and has a long history of rabid anti-Semitism. And Mamdani has been using his mayoral platform to preach more and more about the Quran and the wonders of the Quran and the fusion of the Quran with leftist politics about open borders and illegal aliens. So he has a problem, and New York still has a sizable Jewish community, and even leftist Jews are getting worried. I know that because on my personal Facebook page, where I never ever post, I follow a group that's headed by a lovely man, Jewish, very Democrat, and I guarantee you he might be voting for Republicans in the coming election in the fall, the midterm, and I think he'll vote for a Republican in the next presidential election because he has seen what the Democrat Party has become. But so there's a story in the Forward, which is the left-wing Jewish newspaper. It's an old newspaper, and it's very left-wing, always has been. The title is Mamdani to attend Passover Seder as he navigates ties with Jewish groups amid rising anti-Semitism. Notice how careful that caption is. It's not rising anti-Semitism. It claims that he is anti-Semitic. But you have to hear about this Passover. And remember how I told you one of the themes of this podcast is the dishonest media? I want to read you from this Forward article. So there's a little intro that he's going to the Seder, and it's said that it's called the Downtown Seder. It's at the City Winery in Manhattan. It's all about the symbolic relationship, blah, blah, blah. First paragraph's puffery. Second paragraph is where I'll start reading. Mamdani is slated to appear alongside a liberal rabbi, keep that in mind, a liberal rabbi, an Israeli musician, and an observant comedian at the annual Downtown Seder hosted by nightlife impresario and entrepreneur Michael Dorf. All net proceeds from the event will be donated to Seeds of Peace, a New York-based nonprofit founded in 1993 that helps young people from conflict regions build leadership skills and engage in dialogue. And here's a description of this Downtown Seder. Founded in 1991 and held at the East Village's Knitting Factory and later at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, the Downtown Seder brings together artists, activists, and public figures for a contemporary retelling of the Exodus story. Dorf, who is Jewish and launched City Winery in 2008, has described the gathering as a supplement to traditional Seders. I told you about my Berkeley experience. Now I'll tell you about my experience as a young lawyer. I graduated from law school in 87 and joined a downtown San Francisco firm. It was an old line firm that started actually as a construction law firm in the 20s with Kaiser and Bechtel and all those people. It was not a welcoming place to people who were leftist, but it had signed on all these leftist people because it was trying to get in the swing of things. And so there we were, an entering class of malcontent feminists, of which I was young, one of them, and gays and minorities. All of us were malcontents, and we deeply resented the cohort of straight white men who were also hired and who did really well because they did something we did not do. Rather than whining, they actually worked. It was we called them the white boys. Okay, see, all the seeds of what I see now, I was then. I wised up. It took me decades. I'm hoping today's young people wise up faster because we need them to. So anyway, I got invited to a Seder held by one of my gay associates, and he was a very nice man, quite brilliant and very talented. He calls himself a rabbi now. Well, anyway, this was a Seder. I was the only straight person there. As you may know, the Seder is how we came to the Ten Commandments. It's the story of the Jews' liberation from slavery in Egypt with God's help, and their travails, and how Moses brought down the Ten Commandments and other commandments from Mount Sinai, direct from God. It is a seminal moment in Western history. It is a hugely important moment because it marks sort of the second creation of the Jewish people. The first creation was the Abrahamic one, but this, after their slavery, was the second one with the Ten Commandments, which were built on the Noahide laws, which, long story, I won't go there. You can look it up, or maybe one day I'll talk to you about it. I have a very primitive understanding because I was brought up outside of the synagogue, but I have tried to educate myself, and I know a little bit, and I know the difference. I know the history a bit, and I know the difference between the Jewish world and the pagan world that preceded it, which is really important, and that's where the Seder comes in. But at this Seder, the whole thing was that the Exodus was symbolic of gays coming out of the closet. This was in 1988. The entire Seder, everything had been reduced to gays coming out of the closet. That was the liberation. It wasn't about the revelation of God. It wasn't about God's power. It wasn't about the parting of the Red Sea. It wasn't about the worship of the golden calf and the escape into paganism and God's and Moses' anger. And it wasn't about the moral laws of the Ten Commandments. It was about coming out of the closet. Boy, did I remember that when I looked up, what is this downtown Seder that Mayor Mamdani is attending? Oy vey. Oy vey. I went to ChatGPT. The downtown Seder in New York, especially the long-running artist-driven Seders associated with the downtown art scene since the 1990s to 2010s, is known less for a single fixed script and more for continually reinventing the Passover story. Across different years and hosts, a few clear patterns of modern retellings emerge. First, the Exodus as contemporary politics and liberation struggles. Many downtown Seders reinterpret the biblical story as a lens on current injustices. Civil rights and racial injustice. Following the legacy of the 1969 Freedom Seder, modern versions often connect Pharaoh's oppression to systemic racism and liberation movements. Modern slavery and labor exploitation. Some readings explicitly link the Exodus to human trafficking, migrant labor, and economic injustice. Refugees and migration. The journey out of Egypt is reframed as a story about displaced people today, e.g. refugees crossing the borders. So it's it's endless. At downtown Seders, these themes are often delivered through spoken word, political readings, or guest activists, turning the ritual into a kind of live social commentary. But wait, there's more. There are inclusive and identity-based retellings. Downtown Seders frequently expand who is centered in the story. Feminist retellings, highlighting women like Miriam, adding new rituals, Miriam's cup, or rewriting the four sons, as inclusive figures. For those who don't know, the four sons are the four questions. The famous one is Manishtanach halayla hazeh mechol halalot. It's why is this night different from all other nights? So the four children, if you have four children at the table, or the youngest people at the table, ask these questions so that they can understand why the Seder is important. And regarding Manishtanach halayla hazeh, why is this night different from all others? A very old Jewish joke is that King Arthur calls together the Knights of the Round Table, and they all assemble, and they're gorgeous, and they're on their grand horses, and their armor is shiny, and they're carrying banners, and then suddenly there's one knight who's on a little donkey, and his armor is rusty, and he's got a little flag. And King Arthur turns to the courtiers and says, Manishtanach halayla hazeh. So there's a Jewish pun for you. Going back to the list, LGBTQ plus inclusion. Symbols like the orange on the Seder plate represent marginalized identities and belonging. We never had an orange on the Seder plate when I grew up, and my parents did do Passover at great length, and everything was done twice, first in English and then in Hebrew, and then all the songs were done twice too, because my mom and dad knew them from different traditions, and they had different melodies, so everything was done twice. Interfaith and multicultural framing, connecting the Exodus to universal struggles for freedom across cultures. This is a very common theme to de-Judaize Judaism. It's the same way the Anne Frank International Center, or whatever it is, has turned it not about Jews and the Holocaust and Anne Frank, but into Muslims in Syria and Africa and just anything they can throw together. Continuing with ChatGPT, the Exodus becomes a story not just about ancient Israelites, but about anyone excluded or seeking liberation. So it wraps up the Exodus as a universal human story, blah, 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 blah. But wait, there's more. Remember, see, I keep saying that. I'm sorry. I loved those old commercials when I was home as a kid sick, and I'd watch them. But wait, there's more. And then there'd be some other fabulous slice and dice and super deal. Anyway, what about that liberal rabbi? Remember, I told you, pay attention to that phrase about the liberal rabbi. Now I go to the Washington Free Beacon and Andrew Stiles, who often writes satire. But this is actually true. So it's about Zaron Mamdani going to this Seder. And who is the liberal rabbi? Rabbi Amichai Lau Levi will appear at the Seder by video from Israel. The rabbi and human rights activist is best known as the subject of the documentary film Sabbath Queen, which followed Lau Levi's epic journey as a drag queen rebel who challenged his patriarchy and supremacy. It is not known if the rabbi will appear as himself or his drag alter ego, Hadassah Gross. The foreword tried to hide that fact. The Washington Free Beacon did not. And speaking of the drag queen rabbi, the guy whose Seder I went to all those years ago, a drag queen, although that happened after I went to the Seder. Switching subjects, if you're looking at the screen, what you'll see is Whoopi Goldberg and Sunny Hostin surrounded by smiling-faced children. The reason this is interesting is because Whoopi and Sunny, actually Sunny and Whoopi to put it in the correct order, went on a rant against some influencer, conservative influencer, who encouraged people to have children. I'll play some of it. It goes on and on and on. I won't play Whoopi. She agreed with Sunny, but I'll play the Sunny Hostin thing for you.
And I think it's just really reckless to be suggesting that people should have children when you now know in this country there's this affordability crisis, and for a two-person household, a married household, you need over $400,000 for childcare. Over $400,000. Most people don't make over $400,000. So she's advocating for people to be born into poverty, people not being able to feed those children, people not being able to educate those children, and people not being able to house those children at the same time when this government is cutting all of the services that would allow people to have families and big families and
Let's
children.
not forget
$400,000 over the
makes-
lifetime.
There are a few points to make here. First of all, Sunny Hostin has 2 children and Whoopi Goldberg has 1. So obviously, not having children is for thee, but not for me. Second thing is that this really echoes Margaret Sanger, but with a more modern twist. Margaret Sanger's whole point about birth control was to keep undesirables from procreating. And in her day, an undesirable was a racial thing. And also about mentally defective, because there's a book called Dear Enemy by the same woman, Jean Webster, who wrote Daddy Longlegs. And some of you may be familiar with Daddy Longlegs because it was made into a Fred Astaire film, and it's been very popular over the decades. It's in the form of letters, and it's about a girl who goes to college and writes letters to a girl from an orphanage and writes letters to the man who made it possible for her to go. It was published in 1912. It's incredibly charming. Very few people have read the sequel, and the sequel is about one of her classmates who goes to the very same orphanage from which this girl came and becomes head of the orphanage. And there's a whole subtext in it about a defective family that ought never to have been born at all, because the author, Jean Webster, was a follower of Fabianism, which was socialism, and socialism, although the socialists don't want to admit it now, has always been about eugenics. Progressives in America were huge on eugenics. Hitler was just part of that. His whole eugenics thing came from, frankly, the American and British eugenics movements from the progressives. So what we're hearing from Whoopi and Sunny is that people who aren't wealthy, people who aren't them, people who can't send their kids to expensive colleges where they will be indoctrinated into the leftist canon, should not be having children. Children are reserved for the good people, not the bad people. It's really not just about money. It's about going to college. It's about educating them right. It's about raising them the right way. It's about being up in the not in blue state cities, unless you're in Manhattan in a penthouse, but in the fancy suburbs. God forbid, they don't want the people in the flyover country to have children. The other point is that it's incredibly mean because it is denying people something very important that more and more young people, especially leftist young women, are turning against, which is parenting. I actually didn't want to have children. I had some health reasons I didn't want them, and those turned out through my pregnancies to be fairly well-founded. And I just, I was young and selfish, and in my 20s, I was happy living the young and selfish life. So I had children somewhat reluctantly. I had extremely difficult pregnancies, and for myriad reasons, the first few years were difficult for me. It was the most important thing I have ever done. For one thing, my children are wonderful people. I say that as their mother, but I also try to speak objectively. They are loving, they are self-sufficient, they are kind, they are intelligent. My older one has worked her way to all the right values, meaning my values, and my younger one is getting there, I think. They are the center of my life. They make me more happy than I ever could have imagined being. But they also make me happy because they forced me to grow up. I understand people who life means that they cannot have children. And very often these are wonderful people who grow up on their own. I did not. I had a very loving, but also incredibly narcissistic mother. I grew up in a very loving, stable, and completely dysfunctional household, which is no surprise because my parents had horrific young lives, going from, my mother was in a concentration camp and her parents had already broken up before, and she was bounced from country to country. And my dad was raised in utter poverty in Weimar, Germany, and ended up in an orphanage in Nazi Germany. And then they both made Aliyah to British Mandate Palestine. And as I said, Mom was in a concentration camp in Indonesia, and Dad was at the horrible battles of El Alamein and Crete. And then afterwards they got married and they were plunged into the Israeli War of Independence. And then they came to America, which they never understood. It was a very difficult childhood. So I came out a very brittle, fragile person. And children made me robust. Children made me kind. Now, in my political writing, that's where all the venom that is still within me comes out. But I am a very nice person in person. And that's because of children. Children made me want to be happy. Children made me, and conservatism, Dennis Prager, happiness is a serious problem. And what he said is, you do not have a responsibility for other people's happiness, although I would say that's different with your children. But he also says you have a moral responsibility not to make people unhappy. I learned all that because of children. Children are important. Children are what take us out of our perpetual adolescence, unless we have more insight and sechel, wisdom, than I did. They are part of the human experience. And that these two women would say it's bad to do that is, to me, actually quite evil. I think that's a bad thing and very selfish. Finally, I will wrap up with a relatively short riff on the state of free speech in the Anglosphere. If you're looking at the video, what you are seeing is a bunch of people standing in front of the British and Canadian flags, and they have tape over their mouths saying censored. The reason I did that is because of these two videos. The first video is out of England, and it's a Labour member of Parliament talking about what a shame it is that X came along and allowed people to speak their minds about the British immigration policy, which is everybody who hates Western values is welcome into the country and will be given welfare and housing and medical care priority and never put in prison no matter what crimes they do, and can rape their daughters. Not that he said any of that, but when you listen, you'll understand that he's talking about people who had the temerity to complain about that.
We obviously have social media, which is a massive problem at the moment for engagement. I'm tempted to say, how you make your voice heard as a citizen in 2025 in the UK. Set up an X account and start writing some sort of nativist content, and it will go around the world really, really quickly. Your voice will be heard as quickly as you want it to be. Not in a way that I would be comfortable with, and I would suggest probably not in a way that most people on the panel this evening would be comfortable with either. But that is a really easy way to get your voice heard. Get some content about, how you think immigration's too high, or immigration is the big thing that's tearing the country apart, etc. And that goes around the world because social media, run by the world's richest man, X, is now making sure that you can have your voice heard in a really easy way that you couldn't in the past.
And the second video is out of Canada, and it is a they-them person reminding everybody that it is against the law to misgender someone in Canada.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Smith. I'm a Vancouver lawyer and a QB member. I'm here to talk to you about why it's important to use appropriate pronouns for transgender people. So why does it matter? It's important to use the appropriate pronouns for trans people for a number of reasons. The first reason is that it's the law. Recent changes to the BC Human Rights Code and the Federal Human Rights Act make discrimination on the basis of gender identity and gender expression forbidden. Trans people have always been protected on the basis of sex, but this explicit protection makes our obligation as coworkers and as union members even more clear. Another reason that it's important to use appropriate pronouns for trans people is so that we can do our part to fight back against transphobia.
I really have nothing to add to that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what I clearly think about that. I will say that the only thing between us and the other parts of the Anglosphere, which once shared our free speech values, is the First Amendment. And if the Democrats gain power in Congress and then get the White House, you can kiss your First Amendment goodbye. Well, I'm done. And I hope you enjoyed this quick trek through my brain. I will be back as soon as I have the energy to do another one of these. As I said, I am neither a good engineer nor a good producer, so it's a little bit of work, but I do enjoy it, and I'm always grateful you listen. Thank you so much.